Right, I think it's about time we get started. So thank you for joining us today. This is a Common Futures Conversation webinar on policy ideas for responsible technology. Common Futures Conversation is a flagship Chatham House project centered on bringing together young people from Africa and Europe to discuss important topics and innovative solutions to the world's issues. This event is the culmination of a 6-week-long discussion on responsible technology. We have participants from around the world. We were just talking to our panelists and presenters just now. We will be, I myself am a Common Futures Conversation member. I also have a day job working at Imperial at the Centre for Financial Technology. I'll be doing next year my Master's in Security and Resilience Science and Technology. So I have a big interest in this and I've really enjoyed the discussion so far. I'm quite a new member of the Common Futures Conversation, only 2 months in, but the conversation has been wonderful and the discussion has been great. And we look forward to putting forward some of our policy ideas today. We are joined by 4 CFC members and they'll be pitching 3 ideas. We have 2 wonderful speakers with us today. Nnenna is an Associate Professor of Law and the Head of Law at Buckinghamshire University. Her teaching and research interests relate to the intersection of law and technology, including the governance of emerging technologies, digital rights, and the rule of law in cyberspace. She presently serves as the Vice Chairperson of the African Union Cybersecurity Experts Group and is appointed a Technology and Human Rights Fellow at the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy at Harvard University. She is also a member of the International Law Association Working Group on Digital Challenges for International Law. And in March 2022, she was nominated by the United States Mission to the African Union to participate in the US Department of State's International Visitors Leadership Program on promoting cybersecurity. She was also appointed a mentor on the International Telecommunications Union Women in Cybersecurity Mentorship Program 2022. Nnenna is a regularly invited as an expert consultant by distinguished organizations, and is now presently a lead consultant for the United Nations Economic Commission for African Projects on Cybersecurity. We are also joined by Arthur. Arthur is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs. He is the founder of the Center for the Study of the Drone at Bard College and was its co-director from 2012 to 2020. He serves on the board of advisors for artificial intelligence and Equality Initiative, which seeks to understand the ways in which AI impacts equality and works to empower ethics in AI. So it is deployed in a just and responsible and inclusive manner. Kind of housekeeping before we get started. The event is recorded and will be posted on YouTube later. And it is also not held under the Chatham House rule. I'll now invite our speakers to do a short presentation. So Nnenna, could you start, please?
Thank you so much, Hugo, and thank you very much to the Common Futures Conversation members for inviting me to be part of the discussion on how we can deliver responsible technology. My work focuses primarily, like Hugo talked about, on cybersecurity, governance of emerging technologies, and digital rights, and particularly with a focus on Africa. So focusing on Africa, I will discuss the challenges of governing and regulating these areas, the seeming understanding of tech governance in Africa, as well as my views on the policy areas that should be prioritized in Africa in order to ensure a secure, equitable, and sustainable tech sector. If I still have some time, I will talk about the African Union Cybersecurity Experts Group for members who are from Africa. Now, impressively, Africa has begun exploring an agenda on digital transformation. In February 2020, the African Union Commission adopted the Digital Transformation Strategy for Africa. Now, that strategy particularly highlights that the responsibility of African governments to create an enabling environment with policies and regulations that promote digital transformation across foundation pillars is key. And this includes health, economy, security, agriculture. But the fact is that digital transformation offers Africa tremendous opportunities. However, effective and efficient digital transformation can only happen with digital security and with responsible governance of technology. Or else what you find is that trust will be stifled and it will impact negatively on the realization of the aspirations of the digital transformation strategy. Now, we know this, African countries in particular have been riddled with incidences of governments rampantly blocking or banning internet access or restricting cyber activities for citizens. Last year, Nigeria banned Twitter in Nigeria, and thanks to the ruling of the ECOWAS court. Now, even the court decisions have not served as a deterrent. Particularly in Africa, you find that COVID-19 also highlighted the blatant disregard for privacy rights and data protection with the approaches to collection of data, which has left many citizens in Africa vulnerable to data breaches, cyber threats, and attack. The problem you have, the core challenge is that African governments' view on tech governance are not homogeneous. Unfortunately, African Union member states have diverging interests, and the understanding of tech governance remains diverse. While some are keen to prioritize issues of tech governance, cybersecurity, others regard it as a non-priority, of course, because of so many other prevalent issues. Once you talk about tech governance, the understanding in Africa is cybersecurity. Once you talk about cybersecurity, the understanding is national security, obviously misunderstanding what cybersecurity, tech governance entails. And if you talk about responsible technology, it must be categorized for various actors in Africa, state actors and non-state actors. Nobody should be left out. And so the aspects that should be prioritized includes policy making, and that is why I'm impressed with the conversation today, technical tools and infrastructure, digital access, research, and ensuring a multi-stakeholder approach to tech governance. Now, the reality of tech governance, cybersecurity often collides with the realities of developing states, particularly for states in the African region, which are at the end of the digital divide, lacking the capacity, the skills, and the infrastructure to effectively ensure tech governance at international standards. So developing comprehensive and efficient cybersecurity and generally tech governance strategies, policies, and regulations must be prioritized in Africa. I say this because Africa has a regional convention on cybersecurity and personal data protection. Now, that convention has not received adequate ratifications for it to go into force since 2014. Africa does not have a general data protection legislation like you have in Europe. Many African countries do not have data protection laws either. So it is important to develop capacity for appropriate lawmaking in the aspects of data protection, cybersecurity, and generally ethics in relation to technology. Because countries that are able to develop their own policies will be better placed for tech governance, for digital governance. We need to change the traditional national security-centered conception of cybersecurity in Africa to a multi-stakeholder, people-centered, and human rights-based approach towards legislating. In some instances, the capacity for effective cybersecurity legislating, followed with the capacity for implementing such laws, is still a challenge. So sometimes where African countries have cybersecurity laws and data protection laws, there is still a need for capacity to implement them, mostly because the infrastructure and the technical know-how is lacking. Policymakers also need to understand the technology landscape. What does technology mean? Yes, we always discuss that technology is neutral. Technology may be neutral, but the impact of technology is not neutral to geographical locations, socio-economic realities, political realities, cultural diversities, and development. They are very important in that sense. So actors, the involvement of multi-stakeholders in shaping appropriate and effective policies which consider best practices, and importantly, the UN norms of responsible state behavior is important in Africa. Tech companies are hardly discussed in Africa, and government's approach must underscore public-private partnership, including making policies that advance responsibility and accountability for tech companies, whether they are based locally or not. Now, an often ignored sector in terms of conversations of tech governance is civil society groups. While governments play the primary role in creating the public policies and laws that regulate and determine matters related to technology, it is important to build capacity and to think about civil societies so that Africa can leverage multi-stakeholder partnerships in line with Article 26 of the African Union Convention for Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection. I say this because so many legislations related to cybersecurity in Africa have been tabled for concerns of human rights violations. In 2020, the ECOWAS court also asked Nigeria to repeal or amend its cybersecurity legislation because of its Article 24. So civil society is uniquely positioned to advocate for policies based on a human rights approach and can play an important role in advancing responsible tech discussions by monitoring and documenting government and business practices at the same time. Importantly, African actors also need capacity to be able to contribute effectively to international forums on tech governance. Only about 8 African countries were involved in the UN process that led to the development of the norms of responsible state behavior. When Canada called for a non-paper response, there was no African response. But then when you look at the prosecutorial aspects of tech, African countries are generally involved, like the UN Convention on the Global Convention on Cybercrime. But in terms of responsible state behavior accountability issues, they are hardly at the table. I would just summarize by saying that, however, the African Union has been engaged in efforts to advance capacity. So many efforts have been ongoing, and I will highlight 2 of them. In cooperation with the Internet Society in 2017, Africa developed guidelines on security of internet infrastructure in Africa. Again, the AU Declaration on Internet Governance and Development of Africa's Digital Economy was endorsed in 2018 and adopted as a flagship project for the African Union Agenda for 2063. Again, in 2019, the African Union Commission appointed the African Union Cybersecurity Experts Group, where I serve as a vice chair, composed of 10 members from the diverse regions. And what we do is to work with government to develop cyber policies and strategies with the aim to adopt, monitor, prevent, mitigate, and address current and emerging cyber threats and data misuse in Africa, and as well as developing and implementing confidence building measures in line with existing UN norms. The OE, the Open-Ended Working Group on ICTs and Security, is ongoing in New York, and I must say that there are also efforts, and there was an African School of Internet Governance, which constituted about 30 members across Africa, and there was a paper that was put together, which is being delivered as we speak today. So like I said, so much is going on in Africa, but there are immense gaps in terms of policy, in terms of infrastructure skills, and there are particular areas which I've highlighted that needs to be prioritized for us to see change and to advance the discussion of responsible technology in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nnenna. That was a fascinating overview of the situation in Africa right now. Arthur, could I please ask you to present your introduction?
Sure, thank you very much. It's a wonderful honor to be here, particularly a great honor to share a virtual stage with Dr. Nnenna. I'll just say a couple of things for a couple of minutes so that I can keep us on time, on schedule. Just by way of a little bit of an introduction on what I focus on, I look at a few areas in particular. I started off by looking at uninhabited vehicles, robots, drones across domains, both military and civilian. I then expanded from that to look at surveillance technologies more generally, and more recently, I've been focused very much on artificial intelligence. Again, not only in the military space, not even indeed solely in the security and surveillance space, but in its integration in society more generally. Always with something of a focus on risks. As I often joke, it's quite hard for me to fall asleep at night with all of the scary facts that I have absorbed and contemplated and reflected on over the course of the day, given my specific focus on the risks of technology. But that is all very intentional. I focus on risks predominantly because generating research on risks, helping stakeholders understand risks, is a crucial piece of the implementation arc. If we do not understand risks, not only in terms of their material qualities, how these risks emerge and what they result in, but also in how those risks affect different groups disproportionately, it'll be very hard for us to justly, genuinely, and honestly reap the rewards that technology, in some cases, does have to offer. With that in mind, when I think about my interpretation of what is meant by responsible technology and an approach to quote unquote responsible technology, it's to actually pause and contemplate the term itself. For me, the notion of responsible technology needs to be treated with some caution, because of course, technology itself cannot be responsible. If you think either in an ethical sense or in a legal regulatory sense, technology is never and should never, if indeed you want to follow the letter of the law, be held responsible for quote unquote decisions or actions. With that in mind, what one quickly realizes we're talking about when we talk about responsible technology is the people, the institutions, the infrastructures, the human decisions, the channels of responsibility and accountability and scrutiny and transparency that must necessarily accompany any novel technology, and certainly any powerful novel technology, if we are indeed to reap its benefits and avoid its harms, or at the very least, if it is to cause harm, ensure that those who are harmed have some recourse to justice. I was asked in the background notes to talk about AIEI, the Carnegie Council initiative that I'm a board member of. I would encourage you all to look on the website. It's got some phenomenal resources, but the impulse was really came out of the notion that AI ethics has not necessarily achieved its stated goals, and that some really difficult, honest conversations need to be had in order to make sure that its stated goals are actually achieved in practice. For me, that is the essential challenge of AI ethics now, in a way that easy part of AI ethics was deciding what ethical AI actually is, deciding what the principles were. You know, that there have been a lot of principles that have put out. Most, well, I wouldn't say all, but a very large number of governments have stated AI or responsible technology principles, and that's all well and good. But the tricky part is often in the implementation, not only because of the need for technical literacy and the need for infrastructures and tools of implementation, as Nnenna pointed out, the need for multi-stakeholderism, but also because often the challenges of responsibility really reflect on broader societal or organizational or institutional challenges. You know, if you think about a technology that perhaps has a disproportionately high risk of harm for a certain group within society, simply tweaking the algorithm or the technology itself in order to address that ratio of harm, if you will, is really just a band-aid over a broader problem, and any further iteration of that technology without, in the absence of measures to address those broader institutional problems, may indeed have the same issues.
Arthur. That's very interesting. I'm more interested to hear more about the application of AI, but also the competing ideas of AI going forward. But I'm going to have to take us to our community members.
Please do. No, I'm rambling, so I appreciate the cutoff.
No worries. Well, we're now going to move over to our community members who have come up with some brilliant ideas about how to create responsible technology. I'm going to start with Brian, who came up with the idea of is going to look into the idea of improving data protection laws and practices in developing countries. Brian, can you hear me? Yeah.
Oh yes. Thank you. My name is Brian Odut. I'm a Ugandan lawyer and writer. Currently a research fellow with Konrad Adenauer think tank, researching at the intersection of digital rights, refugees, and youth organizing. So the idea that I developed really is around enacting or amending existing data protection laws in developing countries. And the reason for this is that it's only of recent, maybe about 2019, that a number of African countries started legislating on data protection. And most of these are based on the general data protection rules in the EU. And in Uganda, we have an act of parliament that came into force in 2019. So we don't have it's been a short time to really tell how effectively the law has been working. And so that's Uganda. A number of countries don't have this particular law. So then, which is why this policy, why I came up with this policy. So in specific reference to Uganda, as I said, it's only been enacted in 2019, and there's only been one assessment of the enforcement of this law. An NGO called Unwanted Witness last year released a report called the Privacy Scorecard, really assessing how this law is working and against a number of parameters, including data security of government agencies and over 30 other corporations that collect and process data. And it was a worrying trend, a worrying start for this law, that the average score was 35%. And some of the issues include inadequate capacity of government agencies to regulate organizations, mostly private companies that collect and process data. And one of the most glaring issues was the fact that companies, especially e-commerce platforms, ride-hailing apps, even insurance companies, especially with regards to medical insurance, share information of users with third parties without their consent. And this is very worrying. So in terms of solutions, just to highlight, this report compared how countries, corporations that have operations in more than one country are complying with data protection laws, or how strong their privacy policies are. And we found that in Uganda, a bank will have relatively relaxed practices because the legal system here is not as stringent, or the penalties are not as enforced as rigorously as, say, in South Africa. So that's something that we noticed. So one of the issues in Uganda is the low level of literacy, legal literacy generally, not just relating to data privacy and data protection. Ugandans look at legal, this is a general perception really. Ugandans look at legal issues as something for, they'll seek solutions.
1 minute left, if that's okay.
Pardon?
So you've just 1 minute left, if that's okay.
Oh, okay. Then I'll go to the solutions then really fast. So in terms of enforcement, we need to improve the capacity of the state agencies that enforce these laws, especially the courts. We need to improve the knowledge, the skills of the judges and the prosecutors, but we also need more, we need recruitment, more hires of judges and specialized even prosecutors, because our courts currently are burdened with case backlog. So we need more people to handle these cases. But one of the issues also is to enhance the capacity of the Personal Data Protection Office that was established under the 2019 Act. And finally, one of the solutions that I thought about was a specialized legal aid entity that specializes only on digital rights. So what they would do is to, one, provide legal literacy, which is really accessible, even through WhatsApp, through flyers in public places and the likes, and also to provide legal representation to people who are facing challenges with data breaches and so on, because sometimes they are really up against very powerful corporations and governments. And to conclude, really, this is important because when you talk about data privacy, you're talking about, we're living in the age of surveillance capitalism. So information is being sold and you don't know how this is going to impact individual liberties, but also entire democracies and elections. And this is why it's really important to improve these laws, especially in developing countries like Uganda's. And just, I would like to give one example before I go off. Uganda has had serious challenges with data breaches, especially of information of citizens shared between different government agencies and telecom companies, but also surveillance of activists, politicians, journalists. And Uganda is one of the unsafest countries for LGBTI sexual minority people. So there is a real concern that such information could compromise their safety. Thank you very much for listening to me.
I'm just going to comment on just one part of your excellent proposal, Brian, and that is around digital literacy. It's a term that, as I'm sure you're aware, comes up a great deal in discussions around policy for responsible technology. Digital literacy is obviously great, but it's, I think, important to add just a caveat of caution. One is to think about what types of resources are needed from the citizen in order to have access to that digital literacy. You know, is this a truly equitable way of creating change, or are some members of the population going to have a higher capacity for that digital literacy, education or access to these tools, and as a result, are some members of the population going to be kind of left out by a policy that focuses on digital literacy? The other part about digital literacy that I think is worth noting is that it has the potential danger of putting responsibility on the citizen. You know, we're all aware of the dense legal language or the cookie approval pop-ups that we have to click on when we access a website, for example, in Europe. Now, even if we have some level of digital literacy, that puts the responsibility for any eventual harms or privacy issues on the person who is clicking on those different buttons and having to make those decisions. Whereas, in fact, maybe some of those issues shouldn't necessarily be decisions that are placed on the human, because they might, by putting them on the citizen, rather sort of absolve the company. So it's important to find that balance of how much digital literacy is. Yeah.
Let's cut you off there just to keep the time, if that's okay. But thank you so much. I think I lost connection just for a second. I'd like to move on to Tamar, who'll be talking about e-waste and refurbishment and the circular economy.
Actually, can we just go to Nnenna briefly? Sorry, Hugo. Okay.
No worries.
Thank you so much, and thanks for that important proposal, because more than anything, Brian, data protection is a core issue in Africa. I just wanted to say that, you highlighted a very important part about legislation literacy in Africa. I absolutely agree with you. And what you have found with data protection laws in Africa is a transplanting of legislations from the West. I picked up a legislation in one of the African countries once being proposed, and it was word for word unabridged the UK data protection law. So I agree with your process. I just wanted to say, as you make the proposal, think about inclusion. Touching upon digital ID, think about the necessity of inclusion in terms of ensuring digital identity as a right. And as well, you must think about the realities in the situation where you propose the policy, because then think about how governments can implement the policies they make. And as well, accountability is very important, because when state actors are not accountable, you can't hold tech companies accountable based on your proposal. But absolutely well done. And just to add, can you look out for Research ICT Africa? Alison Gilwald of Research ICT Africa, she's undertaking a data protection assessment of Africa in conjunction with the African Union, and it will be good to have your policies contribute to what is going on. Thank you.
Good job, Brian.
Thank you very much, Nnenna. I'm now going to move on to Tamar, who will be speaking about e-waste refurbishment in the circular economy.
Hello to everyone. Thanks, Hugo, for giving the floor. First of all, I will introduce myself. I'm Tamar. I'm working in the fields of sustainability and international shipping. And I would like to thank you to the organizers for giving the opportunity to introduce the actual topic about the e-waste refurbishment and the circular economy. And I cannot wait to all attendees and members for their questions and feedback. So, Fiona, could you please help me with presentation? Thanks so much. Did you know that the world is only 8.6 circular, and from this, electronic waste has a huge part of the waste that goes to the landfill. According to the UN, the Global Waste Monitor data 2020, a record of almost 54 million metric tons of electronic waste were generated worldwide, and only 70.4% were recycled. So e-waste came on the globally as a global issue since 2016, and currently I will introduce 4 main problems and 4 main solutions. How to do everything, like how to arrange it and how to propose. The first problem we have tackled is e-waste that contains the hazardous substances and is detrimental to the ecosystem, environment, people's health, and animals. So electronic device contains with hazardous waste, hazardous materials such as iron, aluminum, copper, and others that during warming up, it releases toxic chemicals, which at the end goes to the air, soil, and water, and finally affects the environment. We cannot see, but we cannot see this the whole chain, but we can hear how it affects the human health. For example, it risks the cancer, especially in children, neurological disorders, asthma, birth defects, lung function, even hearing loss, and time to time, people just have the problems with their health. The second main problem is e-waste. E-waste is absolutely different waste from the other. For example, if we take the plastic bottle, it needs 450 years to be decomposed. But if we take the paper, it needs just 6 months. What about the electronic device? It contains such material and substance that it is not biodegradable. So it lasts forever on the earth, and this is a huge problem. The third problem is that electronic device contains valuable materials such as copper, gold, iron, and silver that we can, through separating the items, so we can reuse it very well and gain economical, like prosperity. And the first problem is in regulations. Like we have a drawback on the international level that global e-waste flows are not documented. We will go now on the solutions, and we will start from the first solution. What we want to suggest is documenting global e-waste flows. What does it mean? We should document all flows of exporter, importer, and transfer countries. How many quantities of electronic devices are importing and exporting, as well as to measure the ecological impact of the shipping. Plus, as a second solution, when I looked on the UN about what does it mean e-waste, like when we are speaking about the electronic device, for example, bulb is an electronic device or not, and currently technology is evolving. I suggest to create the accurate definition of and evolving definition of e-waste on the international level in the UN. It is created, but it is very broad. It stays only in the previous year's reports. So in order to regulate this topic, we should know which categories, which items we should belong to, which part of the category. And plus, we need the international codes for this. For example, the producer that invents a smart device or gadget, they should directly register on an international level their device. And after, it must be open data for all the countries that will be involved in the invention procedures. And the UN and WTO should be involved in establishing the departments, a special department, in order to provide service if a producer cannot understand in which category to put his own invention. They should refer to the special department and as soon as possible to take the answer on that. And the third solution is governments and the private sector, mostly business sector, to be collaborative, to collaborate to each other. Especially, it is needed the government to give incentives to the e-waste recycling companies. What kinds of incentives it could be? For example, the first is to mitigate the taxes for them. The second is to give the appropriate facilities. For example, such companies need more electricity. If the government gives the solar panels to produce more electricity through alternative energy, it could be a good solution for them to promote their business. And the third is to raise awareness in the population and promote refurbishment. And we are giving money, and we are giving money to the old device instead of old devices to population, and refurbishing the old devices from them. And the first solution is about the data. As we all know that smartphones, laptop, they contain a lot of data, and when someone wants to refurbish their gadget, for example, the laptop, we have always this concern that will be deleted the data what I have in my laptop. So there should exist one international department on the UN, in the UN level, for example, that will give special standards and principles, as well as monitor in every country the process how data are erased in the particular countries, and how refurbishment procedures are going. So to conclude and sum up, I spoke about the four main problems, about the four main solutions. I'm interested in what, from your point of view, which problem or solution could we proceed and elaborate more? Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Tamar. Arthur, would you like to go first with kind of feedback?
Sure. So 2 points. One on the narrative that I think is necessary in order to gain traction for any kind of policy like this. It might be interesting to reframe it or add a framing about this also being a national security prerogative. You know, as these resources become more scarce, as these technologies become more crucial, making it clear to policymakers that actually there are very strong national security reasons to be more judicious in how these technologies are used, thrown away, and indeed recycled or upcycled in order to reduce reliance on these dwindling resources. And the other part, I think, is to think about the balance between incentives for companies and incentives for individual users, which would be depend on a study of who actually produces more and which type of technologies are more easily, either traded in, upcycled, recycled, or broken down. Because I think incentives to citizens can actually be a really powerful thing. And if they're producing a majority of the e-waste, that might be a more direct path than potentially incentives to companies.
Thank you, Arthur. Nnenna, do you have a perspective on the solutions?
Yes, and thank you to Tamara. This was a huge learning for me, I must say. I learned so much, and I particularly like the aspect of including the UN in aspect of directing refurbishment. What you find actually is this sort of dichotomy between the global north and the global south, where, waste that is unwanted, not working, or nearing the end of life, is just transported. I think that in your policy, you must think about digital equality, because if there is no equality, the global south will keep accepting, without thinking of, the effects. So you must think about how policy as well. That is why I like the UN aspect. And thanks to Otto, highlighting national security, I was going to say perhaps if it addressed more like a health policy, health kind of issue, maybe there will be sort of an awakening to the issue. Again, when we talk about policy, we must think about there are soft approaches that policies help to drive awareness raising and education. Perhaps it may be good to think about individual responsibility of citizens, and how policy can influence education and awareness as well. Perhaps that would influence how governments approach the issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If it's okay with everybody, I think we're getting a bit short on time. So I'm going to push past the 6 o'clock mark so that we can still have a bit of a Q&A session afterwards. But I'd like to now invite Jan Storman and Rosa Giorfi, please, to present their ideas on tech ambassadors in the public sector talent retention.
So good afternoon. Thank you for having us. So my name is Rosa. I currently work as a researcher at the OECD. I recently graduated from Sciences Po Paris, and I'll let Jan introduce himself before I start.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to our two speakers and to Chairman for organizing this. I'm a student at the Institut National du Service Public in France, better known as former name ENA. And other than that, I'm a lecturer, and especially respect both of our speakers' work on the security and defense sector, as I'm also working with the Austrian Ministry of Defense as an expert on the hybrid warfare. So the kind of cybersecurity aspect of things is kind of known to me, although we will focus on the civil aspect in our presentation. Now let's Rosa start.
Yes, so at Sciences Po Paris, I did quite a bit of work on digital talent and capacity retention in the public sector, while Jan has written on tech diplomacy during his studies at Vienna. And one of our main observations, repeated observations, was that when facing regulators and tech giants, small countries are especially in need of robust representation.
Now, to this end, Denmark, a couple of years ago, created the position of tech ambassador, a person representing the state's interests in communicating with the companies in Silicon Valley, while also informing the decision makers and regulators at home. The first office holder, however, now works as a lobbyist, as it's kind of well known.
So why do we need tech ambassadors? Because currently nation states are evidently failing to get their priorities taken seriously. Even the British and the European parliaments famously failed to get the CEO of a major social media company to appear in front of their committees. Similarly, a tech giant worth more than the GDP of the Netherlands threatened numerous countries with FDI divestment unless they provided what their COO called legal certainty for the company's operations.
Now, these risks are creating a race to the bottom, of course, and leading to significant tax revenue losses and lackluster regulation. It may even pose a direct threat to sovereignty of a country. So France, right, is particularly concerned about digital sovereignty. Most recently, a major American tech company famously refused to accept a French criminal court's decision. Now, tech ambassadors are specialized civil servants who allow states to understand, regulate, and engage with the tech sector as intermediaries, and are kind of design points of contact for tech giants. However, the tech ambassadors, like many other profiles in the public sector, are heavily impacted by the public sector's overall talent retention problem. While the public sector has never truly competed with the high end of the private sector, of course, for decades, it did provide a sufficiently attractive value proposition. So the question is, what can be done?
Well, the public sector cannot compete on salaries, but it can offer other benefits. A meaningful career with impact, a very stable and predictable form of employment, which can also be quite varied. It can also offer non-fiscal benefits, such as flexi time or remote working. But it also needs to examine the its hiring and HR practices, specifically entry routes into public service and training opportunities. The main issue here is the deeply entrenched opposition to improving conditions in the public sector, which we can see in multiple countries in Europe. Indeed, giving public sector workers pay rises is consistently unpopular with the majority of voters, while cost savings in the public sector are exalted.
Now, both training and recruiting specialized civil servants like tech ambassadors to communicate with tech giants, advise policymakers and regulators in keeping them, as well as other digital talents, in the public service should be a top priority for governments. Making the public service more attractive and adapting recruitment to this challenge seems like the only possible solution if states want to remain or regain digital sovereignty, which is now like one of these dedicated goals, both of the French Republic and most recently, the term has even been adopted by the European Union. So obviously the issue is kind of well known to policymakers. And that's the end of our part. So thank you so much for listening to us, and looking forward to your feedback.
Thank you very much. That's a very interesting discussion, and one I'm particularly interested in, talent retention. Nnenna, would you like to kick things off?
Yes, I want to say thank you to Rosie, thank you to Jan. I particularly love this. And forgive me, Hugo, if I talk more than 1 minute, because many times you find that the discussion of tech governance and responsible tech hardly focuses on leadership, but mostly emphasizes legislation, policies, institutions. Having a regulatory framework and the required institutions will not automatically resolve and deliver responsible technology, and that is why we need agency, what I call digital agency. We need tech ambassadors, we need tech diplomats, and in the international sphere, in terms of cybersecurity, we are now having a crop of cyber diplomats and what you call cyber diplomacy. And what needs to be taken into consideration when you talk about tech ambassadors, tech diplomacy, is human resources. And it transcends the security sector. It involves parliamentarians, diplomats, skilled experts, skilled IT security, skilled ministers, and what have you. So like I said, thanks to Rosie and Jan. What I wanted to say was, when with your proposal, it is important that it underscores finding the right balance between deep technical activities and high-level policy-driven ambitions, so that when states think about policies and what have they, such policies must underscore deep technical activities. The other thing I wanted to talk about was, of course, is there a way, this may be a rhetorical question as well, is there a way that policy will ensure that the people who are employed are capable of making high impact decisions? So it is one thing to employ people who are skilled, have people who are skilled as tech ambassadors, but it's also right that they are able to make the impact decisions. And I talk from my region because most times you appoint politicians who may not necessarily have the skills. And perhaps in the UN forum, if you're involved in the open-ended working group discussions and being part of it, driving your policy in that level, this would be a very good proposal to say that as they make proposals on gender capacity building, they should think about agency and the role of tech ambassadors, and having that perhaps it may not just be civil service, politicians as well, and to think about. But absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Nnenna. That's, I think, a very important point. I see it a lot with my job, is that even if you have tech literate people in situations, they may not have the power to actually make the decisions, and they may actually end up in a kind of a dead end section of their career because of it, and move out to the kind of private industry where it pays better and they can have a bigger impact. I'm going to now pass over to Arthur for his thoughts.
Well, two things. One, very quickly to build on that point you just made, even if you can retain an exceptionally smart tech literate person, if they go to their boss and the second they start talking, their boss's eyes just glaze over completely, and the boss starts checking their messages and, wishing the conversation would end as soon as possible, then you've made no difference, right? So thinking not only about retention, but also ensuring that those people do have some sway is a crucial part of the puzzle. A second part is to think about the education pipeline, to really instill a culture of civil service, like really, really early, instead of trying to compete in the open market with college graduates who have, for their whole lives, just been aiming for Silicon Valley. They're not necessarily going to be thinking about government, but if there are ways of getting into the education pipeline sooner with fellowships, with programs, things of that nature, then maybe you can build up that groundswell a little earlier, and you'll prime people for those types of jobs so that you don't have to compete on the salary factor or the coolness factor or the fact that you can wear khakis factor, and really just do it on the basis of principles.
I want to say a big thank you to all our CFC members who have put forward their proposals, and also our experts for helping out. We have a bit of time for questions. If you'd like to put your questions into the Q&A box, I thought I'd ask the first one as the chair, and kind of carrying on with this idea of tech retention. I have personal experience. When I was young, I was brought into a military school that was aimed at people going into tech careers within the military. I decided not to go down there because I didn't like the kind of ethos. Do you think it can sometimes be a kind of push away factor, kind of the internal ethos of a civil service and how they run themselves, that can push people away from going into that career who have tech literacy? Because let's take a kind of standard approach to what Silicon Valley might be. It might be fun times and slides and interacting, having more fun, more social interactions, or the civil service and the military and all that sort of stuff is very hierarchical. Do you think that will be impeding people joining?
Absolutely. I mean, I would just immediately make an absolutely. I mean, as kind of the old cliche goes, you don't leave jobs, you leave bosses or kind of workplace cultures. Yes, kind of what the ethos of a organization or a service is very much impacts the kind of people it attracts. And all too often, I don't want to generalize across countries, but all too often, not only civil services as a whole, but individual departments or agencies have their very own culture, which either attracts or pushes away the right people. I don't know if you have anything to add on that, Jan. I think you have more experience on this.
Thank you so much. I think I'll leave it to the speakers, but yeah, no, I fully agree as well with what Hugo said. And you?
I think government should be cautious about trying to imitate the tech sector. Potential recruits or candidates can very quickly see through, a ploy by a government agency to kind of appear to be hip, cool, to look like, a kind of Silicon Valley startup. Well, everyone knows that that's simply, not the case. So I don't think competing on the kind of coolness factor or the cultural factor is necessarily a winning strategy either. I think also a big part of it is maybe just understanding what motivates people to join the tech sector. Maybe it's because there's a real desire to think around regulations and to think around red tape. And so if a person's motivated for those reasons, then they perhaps will, trying to get them into government is perhaps a little bit of a non-starter. But once you have that kind of cultural understanding of the sector and the candidate pool, then you may, you may be able to think of actually what will be able to draw people in and keep them.
Great, thank you, Arthur. There's a question in the chat for Nnenna from Haiti. How can African states prioritize cybersecurity and put it on top of their agendas when there is high tech illiteracy and lack of infrastructure?
I think the question also answers itself, because of course, if it is prioritized, then of course, infrastructure will be prioritized. Digital literacy would also be prioritized. When you talk about prioritization, you're not just talking about the laws, but of course, the enabling factor. And it's a whole strategy. It's not just the laws, the infrastructure, the literacy. So when we talk about priority, we mean that, you know, starting from access, starting from the skills, the capacity. And I want to also add, because that's a very valid question, I think we shouldn't always concentrate on the security aspect. Like I said, the challenge is an over-militarization. For example, digital literacy can be focused on from educational levels, curricula, that is all part of a global, broad agenda. Apart from education, empowering youths, empowering women, bridging the gender digital divide, all this adds value. It's sort of a ripple effect. So when we say prioritization, it's not just the laws, but of course, infrastructure, economy, everything that enables responsible tech governance.
Thank you very much. I'm also going to pick up another question from the chat. This might be good for Arthur to answer. How would we define safe technology with this rate at which technology is advancing? We definitely accept cookies all the time without knowledge of what it is. And that's from Tracy.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a misperception actually about the rate at which technology changes. There are certainly individual step change moments in technology where suddenly something explodes onto the scene that is totally unprecedented. But often the narrative that technology moves more quickly than regulation or our capacity to define it. It's actually a narrative that very well serves the kind of position of being against the definitions or against regulation. It dovetails nicely with the position that regulation is by default anti-innovation. And so even though technology does move very quickly, I think we should challenge the assumption that it moves more quickly than our ability to define it. It moves more quickly than our ability to be anticipatory. And also the notion that it moves so quickly and companies have no choice but to deploy a technology in a regulatory vacuum. That actually is not necessarily true. I mean, the companies, if they develop a technology that exists in a regulatory vacuum, they do have the option to look for a way of regulating that before they deploy it. In the same way that a chemicals company, if chemicals company develops a new and highly toxic chemical, they probably won't just start releasing it into the world without restrictions just because those restrictions haven't been defined and articulated in policy. Chances are they will look to government guidance on how to create guardrails for the use of that technology so that when it goes on the market, those harms can be reduced. I think some of that thinking is potentially a useful reframing of the technology moving too fast kind of narrative that we've seen, even though it does move fast.
Then would you have anything to add to that?
I was thinking because of time, but absolutely, I think Arthur has said everything. I would, yes.
Great. Well,
may I add to this shortly?
I think we could have a bit more time. I'd like to finish at 5 if that's okay.
May I?
Yes.
So I just wanted to mention that it's a very good question, firstly, and I have paid attention on that too in the technologies and indigenous languages, that I think that every company has to have obligation to just translate into their native language the policy privacy about when you are using something like a website, for example. You should have a opportunity to read shortly and in friendly language and in your language actually what you are using and what data are you giving. We are just clicking accepting the privacy policy of something particular website. So I think it should be regulated as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And I want to say a big thank you to our experts. It was wonderful to have you input on policy ideas that were put forward. And I also say a big thank you to the CFC members. We will be opening the opportunity to join the CFC in August. You can find more information on the Chatham House website. It's aimed at people in Africa and Europe between the ages of 18 to 30. But hopefully we'll be having more of these events in the future. We'll be going into the next challenge soon. And we'll be able to then carry on the discussion there. But I'd also like to invite everybody to follow the Common Futures conversation on Twitter, as well as on Instagram. Hopefully we should have those posted up there perfectly. Well, yeah, thank you so much, and I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their evening.